Shabbat Shalom. So in chapter 18, we get a fascinating discussion of the establishment of a legal system, of a court system, going through a hierarchy of different levels of judicial intimacy. For more on that, you can watch the video from last night's sermon. But there is a wonderful phrase that is meant to answer a very important question. If Moses is going to need to establish these courts for the thousands, the hundreds, the 50s, and the 10s, who gets to be a shofet? Who gets to be the judge? Who is going to sit and act as an arbiter for debates, discussions, and questions among the different people within the different levels of dispute? And the answer that's given, very simple, Anshe Chayil. Well, Anshe is easy. It's the compound form of the word for men. But what does Chayil mean in this context? Well, to answer that question, you may be surprised to know that the longest extended discussion of what it means to be Chayil, to have that as part of your character trait, comes from the end of the book of Proverbs in a very famous section known as Eshet Chayil. Anyone familiar with Eshet Chayil? You might know it by its more common English title, A Woman of Valor. Now, Woman of Valor, okay. So Chayil means valor then. Anybody here have a working definition of valor that fits even English? No. It is one of those wonderful empty praise words that doesn't actually seem to mean anything in English when you get down to it, but instead we need examples. But do not despair. That's the whole point of Mishlei, the book of Proverbs, is to give us examples, some of which you may remember. From the Woman of Valor poem, as many people call it, which it isn't, but from that section, what are the characteristics of this Eshet Chayil, this woman of valor? What does she do? She's a good housekeeper, right? She never eats on the bread of laziness, right? She is very active. And she is good not only to the people under her command within her army of laborers, but she is also someone who opens her hands to the poor. She is someone who helps even those that aren't in her household if they are in need. Excellent. What else does she do? Her children and her husband praise her. So whatever she's doing it in a way that makes them rise and praise her, which is the ultimate symbol of praise, that they will stand and respect her. Absolutely. And what is she doing else to earn that praise? Let's say she is, politics is kind of an ugly word and many people cringe at it. She is active in her community. And she is active both socially. She is somebody that speaks kindness and has a lesson of Torah on her tongue. She is someone that is involved in the good and well-being of her community around her. She is also somebody economically involved in her community. Not only is she preparing for the needs of her household, but she is also buying and selling in the marketplace, and I don't mean oranges. I mean she is actually sending ships to and fro. She is a merchant trader. She is somebody involved in finance beyond just the cottage industry, if you will. And she is somebody that counsels her husband, who was the only one allowed to sit within the gates, meaning within the public forum, in order that he will be praised, in order that he will have good counsel for the community. And characteristically, for her own personality, she is somebody not obsessed with vanity or self-aggrandizement. She is somebody that is in awe of God, that shows respect for what is right and what is good, as the Torah teaches. That's the same definition of Chayil for the Ish as well as the Isha. That is to say, there isn't a male version of Chayil and a female version of Chayil. It is exactly the same word used in both constructs. Anshe Chayil, Eshet Chayil, it's the same word, and the Eshet Chayil definition applies to the man every bit as much as it applies to the woman. But you might have caught on to something that I mentioned in passing. If that is so, if the definition of what it is to be this valorous, good, or I think maybe meritorious might be a better definition, if that definition is the same regardless of whether they are a man or a woman, then why is it that Moses is only looking for anshe chayil? Why is he only looking for men? Well, first of all, I'll point out grammatically anshe chayil could be both men or men and women, as the grammatical masculine plural can be a mixed group as well as a homogeneous male group. But when we look through our texts, do we find women acting in the capacity of judges for the community? Deborah. We do. And on top of Deborah, we also find people like Miriam, who acts very strongly within the community. We have the examples of Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, who were all instrumental in the running of their household and in how their community grew. So we do have many examples. Later on, we get people like Abigail and others that are very outspoken voices that do much good for not just their family, home life, but for the nation. But Deborah is a great example, because Deborah can help us understand the historical issues that may lead some to be scratching their head at parts of the sermon. Because Deborah was a Neviah. She was a prophet, and Deborah was a shofetet. I always get that conjugation wrong on my tongue, because some things just don't come out smoothly from me. She was also the judge of her generation. She was a person who gave the instructions for the entire community. And the story, which we read last week, so this should be a review, the story is that she calls in Barak, who is the general, and tells him, "Up! It is time to go to war in order to defend our people, because the Canaanite king of Yavin and his general Sisera are pouring down upon us. We need to stand against them." And Barak's response to this woman giving him the order is, "I don't take orders from women." No, he doesn't say that. He says something quite the opposite. "I'll go if you go. I'll go out to fight if you come with me." Now, many people have mocked Barak for his weakness during this time. But Barak may have been simply saying, look, when Moses gave orders for there to be a war, Moses was there at the battlefield. When Joshua gave orders for war, Joshua was there at the battlefield. If you are going to give orders for war, then you need to be here as well. And yet, we would be wrong if we didn't notice that there was some tension about glory and honor and who was going to be gaining more prestige and fame from this event. Indeed, Devorah even warns him, fine, but a woman will be the one who gets the glory, knowing that within that part of the society, that might change his mind. And indeed it is, although it's not Deborah who gets the glory, it is Yael, as we talked about more last week. But now we get the hint of historically what happened. Because if we understand that to be a chayil could be both a man or to be a woman, that they are the same merits involved in both, and if we understand that the Torah itself may not have been saying it should only be men, because after all, we do have very prominent examples of women, and we don't have any negative statements that women are not allowed to have those roles, then when did it happen that we began to get negative statements that women should not have those roles, or lead services, or read from the Torah? Where did that creep in? Well, it crept in as egos began to weaken. And by egos, I mean, self-pride, a sense of self-worth. In fact, the discussion of the Torah is perhaps the clearest example of this, of who gets to read from the Torah. Well, it's very clear from the ancient sources and our rabbinic literature that anyone who was competent to read from the Torah, man, woman, or child, as long as they were old enough to know what they were doing and capable of doing it, should be allowed to read from the Torah publicly. Duh! Why would you not let anybody do that? At Mount Sinai, everybody was there to receive the Torah. Everyone can share the Torah as they need to. But what excuse does our tradition introduce of why that fell out of favor and why it became the exclusive prerogative of men? Kibud hatzibur, the honor of the community. Well, honor of half the community. That is to say, historically, there was a concern. As our nation was in exile, as our people were under occupation, there was a concern that the level of education, of Jewish knowledge, of Jewish capability was diminishing. This is true. There were many people who couldn't speak Hebrew at all and only knew Aramaic. as being the more common language of that time. This is why some of the more famous prayers, such as the Kaddish, are written in Aramaic. They were meant to be understood by the uneducated among the Jewish world because they didn't know Hebrew well enough to be able to use it or understand it. Well, imagine the shame that a man would feel who, because of all of the crises of the world, had never really properly learned Hebrew, never really properly learned Torah, never really properly learned how to chant Torah in Hebrew, that there on the bima was a woman doing it. That she was doing it and he couldn't. The humiliation, the shame. Well, yes, for some of them it probably was. When you are in an insulated community, when your world has shrunk down due to the oppression and pain that has been heaped upon you by foreign invaders and occupiers, then perhaps the four walls of your community seem to be the only place where you can earn honor and respect. And unfortunately, that ego vulnerability meant that our tradition closed doors to women that had been open prior, in order that the men not be completely ashamed, not be completely humiliated. Now you're probably thinking, well, that doesn't seem fair. And you're mostly right. It's not very fair. Where is the honor of the other half of the community, the honor of the women who were reading from the Torah, who were able to participate in the level because for whatever reason they had been able to secure an education despite the problems that were going on around? What about them? Well, yes. What about them? This is a problem in our past, and we cannot avoid recognizing that mistakes were made. We can argue sociologically, demographically, and culturally, psychology, that men's egos are more vulnerable, that the women still had a way to earn self-worth because of the praise the community would give to them for the production of children that was always held a little bit differently than for men having those same children, although that is not quite as cut and dry as it may appear. We can argue that under the patriarchal economy of the system, that women were simply beholden to the men, and so there was very little opportunity anyway, so what was taking away one more thing? They were already second class in many respects. And we can also argue that if you didn't do this, that Jewish men would have simply withered on the vine for embarrassment and shame. And that would not have been good for the community either. That if we had to make difficult choices, this was the best among the difficult choices at that moment. Now, I'm not going to go back and armchair quarterback what was decided 1,800 years ago, because I didn't live during the terror of the Roman destruction of the diaspora, of our people being murdered and carted away as slaves. I didn't live through those time periods where Jews would be kicked from community to community and impoverished over and over again. And I can't honestly tell you that they didn't make a good choice. After all, we are still here, so something about what they did kind of sort of worked, or else we wouldn't. But I can tell you that there is no reason to hold on to it. And that as a Jewish man, I no longer want my honor protected by ensuring that half of the community is kept off the playing field. I am not going to prize a trophy that was won only because valid competitors were not allowed to compete. We all remember the difficulty and the asterisks that went into the awards during the 1980 and 1984 Olympics, when either the US or the Soviet Union and its allies were not participating, and how the gold medals felt just a little bit cheaper due to that process of not having the full range of competitors on the field. Well, so too in the modern world. I do not need protection for my honor and my sense of self-worth by ensuring that others are unable to compete against me. I am glad that there are women rabbis out there, and not that I would be looking for another job, but if I did, I would want them to be equally considered and weighed against myself for any position, for they may be a better rabbi for that particular community, as it should be. I cannot take pride in my accomplishments if I know that my accomplishments were won only because others were not allowed to participate in that process. I want no advantage or perk that is due to an accident of my birth, whether it be my gender, whether it be my race, whether it be my religion, whether it be my nationality. And I want no hindrance due to any accidents of my birth. We are living now in a world and society where we are capable of competing fairly one against another, where we are able to find a sense of self-worth in something that is not inherent within our biology, but is created through our activity. We are capable of striding farther and higher now than ever before, but we cannot do it if we deny the right for some to walk that path, and we cannot look ourselves in the mirror and feel pride if we recognize that we have walked with a diminished community because of some vanity or fragility in our ego. Judaism has had its ups and downs, and I cannot tell you that we have always done right by all people. That is what it is to be a nation. We make mistakes. But I can say that we have done better in recent history, and we have a ways to go, and that as we try to find our sense of self-worth and detach it from things that are of accident of birth, we will find that we are indeed worthy. We are indeed capable of more than we imagine. That we can all be Anshe Chayil, men, women, and all. That valor, that merit is open to all of us and should be pursued by all of us passionately. We need not rely upon participation trophies awarded merely because of our DNA or the stamp in our passport. We are all better than that, and we all have much more to give than merely our presence. Shabbat Shalom.